Korea under Japanese rule began with the end of the Joseon dynastic monarchy in Korea in 1910 and ended at the conclusion of World War II in 1945. Japanese rule of Korea was the outcome of a process that began with the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1876, whereby a complex coalition of Meiji government, military, and business officials sought to integrate Korea both politically and economically into the Empire of Japan. A major stepping stone towards Japanese occupation of Korea was the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1905, in which the then Empire of Korea was declared a protectorate of Japan. The annexation of Korea by Japan was set up in the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1910, which was never actually signed by the Korean regent Gojong. Imperial Japanese rule over Korea ended in 1945, when American and Soviet forces liberated the peninsula. In 1965, the unequal treaties between Joseon-ruled Korea and Imperial Japan, especially those of 1905 and 1910, were declared already null and void at the time of the promulgation by the Treaty on Basic Relations between Japan and South Korea. Japanese administration of the Korean peninsula was directed through the general government. After the Japanese withdrawal from the Korean peninsula followed by the Japanese surrender to Allied forces at the end of the Second World War, Korea returned to independence, albeit under two separate governments and economic systems backed by the USSR and by the United States. The industrialization of the Korean peninsula, begun by the Joseon dynasty while Korea was still independent but vastly accelerated under Japanese occupation, continues to be the subject of controversy between the two Koreas and Japan. The manner of the acceleration of industrialization under Japanese occupation, especially utilization of industrialization only for the purposes of benefiting Japan, the exploitation of the Korean people in their own country, the marginalization of Korean history and culture, the environmental exploitation of the Korean peninsula, and its alleged long-term negative repercussions for modern-day North and South Korea are among the most provocative aspects of controversy. Terminology. In South Korea, the period is usually described as the Japanese Imperial Period, or the period of the Japanese Imperial Colonial Administration. Other terms include Japanese Forced Occupation, or WA administration. In Japan, the term chosen of the Japanese-governed period has been used. Background: designing colonization efforts in Japan. During the late 18th to late 19th centuries, Western governments sought to intercede in and influence the political and economic fortunes of Asian countries through the use of new approaches described by such terms as protectorate, sphere of influence, and concession, which minimized the need for direct military conflict between competing European powers. The newly modernized government of Meiji Japan sought to join these colonizing efforts, and the Seikonron began in 1873. This effort was allegedly fueled by Saigo Takamori and his supporters, who insisted that Japan confront Korea's refusal to recognize the legitimacy of Emperor Meiji as ruler of Japan, as well as for supposed insulting treatment meted out to Japanese envoys attempting to establish new trade and diplomatic relations. The debate concerned Korea, then in the sphere of influence of King China, which certain elements in the Japanese government sought to separate from Chinese influence and establish as a puppet state. Those in favor also saw the issue as an opportunity to find meaningful employment for the thousands of out-of-work samurai, who had lost most of their income and social standing in the new Meiji socio-economic order. Further, the acquisition of Korea would provide both a foothold on the Asian continent for Japanese expansion and a rich source of raw materials for Japanese industry. The arguments against such designs were outlined in Okubo Toshimichi's 7-point document, dated October 1873, in which he argued that action against Korea was premature, as Japan itself was in the process of modernization and an expedition would be far too costly for Japan to sustain. Okubo's views were supported by the anti-war faction, which mostly consisted of those returning from the Iwakura mission in 1873. Iwakura Tomomi, the diplomat who had led the mission, persuaded the emperor to reconsider, thus putting an end to the debate. Political turmoil in Korea. Destabilization of the Korean nation may be said to have begun in the period of Sedo Genchi, whereby, at the death of King Zhengho of Joseon, the 10-year-old Sunjo of Joseon ascended the Korean throne, with the true power of the administration residing with his regent, Kim Jo-sun, as a representative of the Andong Kim clan. As a result, the disarray and blatant corruption in the Korean government, particularly in the three main areas of revenues, land tax, military service, and the state granary system, heaped additional hardship on the peasantry. Of special note is the corruption of the local functionaries, who could purchase an appointment as an administrator and cloak the predations on the farmers with an aura of officialdom. Jangban families, formerly well respected for the status as a noble class, were increasingly seen as little more than commoners unwilling to meet the responsibilities to the communities. Faced with increasing corruption in the government, brigandage of the disenfranchised and abuse by the military, many poor village folk sought to pool their resources, such as land, tools, and production, to survive. Despite the government abolishing slavery and burning the records in 1801, increasing numbers of peasants and farmers become involved in geya or mutual assistance associations. At this time, Catholic and Protestant missions were well tolerated among the Yangban, most notably in and around the area of Seoul. Animus and persecution by more conservative elements, the Pungyangjo clan, took the lives of priests and followers known as the Korean martyrs, dissuading membership by the upper class. Peasants continued to be drawn to Christian egalitarianism, though mainly in urban and suburban areas. Arguably of greater influence were the religious teachings of Choshyu, called Dongguk, which became especially popular in rural areas. Themes of exclusionism, nationalism, salvation and social consciousness were set to music, allowing illiterate farmers to understand and accept them more readily. Along with many other Koreans, Cho was alarmed by the intrusion of Christianity and the Anglo-French occupation of Beijing during the Second Opium War. He believed the best way to counter foreign influence in Korea was to introduce democratic and human rights reforms internally. Nationalism and social reform struck a chord among peasant guerrillas, and Dongguk spread all across Korea. Progressive revolutionaries organized the peasants into a cohesive structure. Arrested in 1863 following the Jinju uprising led by Yu Kai-chun, Cho was charged with misleading the people and sowing discord in society. Cho was executed in 1864, sending many of his followers into hiding in the mountains. Gojong of Korea, enthroned at the age of 12, succeeded Cheolcheong of Joseon. King Gojong's father, Hengxian Daewongun, ruled as the de facto regent and inaugurated far-ranging reforms to strengthen the central administration. Of special note was the decision to rebuild palace buildings and finance the project through additional levies on the population. Further, inherited rule by a few elite ruling families was challenged by the adoption of a merit system for official appointments. In addition, private academies, which threatened to develop a parallel system to the corrupt government and enjoyed special privileges, and large landholdings were taxed and repressed despite bitter opposition from Confucian scholars. Lastly, a policy of steadfast isolationism was enforced to staunch the increasing intrusion of Western thought and technology. He was impeached in 1873 and forced into retirement by the supporters of Empress Myeongseong, also called Queen Min. Japan-Korea Treaty of 1876. 3 years later, on the 27th of February 1876, the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1876, also known in Japan as the Japanese-Korea Treaty of Amity, was signed. It was designed to open up Korea to Japanese trade, and the rights granted to Japan under the treaty were similar to those granted Western powers in Japan following the visit of Commodore Perry in 1854. However, the treaty ended Korea's status as a protectorate of China, forced open 3 Korean ports to Japanese trade, granted extraterritorial rights to Japanese citizens, and was an unequal treaty signed under duress of the Gangwon Island Incident of 1875. As a result of the treaty, Japanese merchants came to Busan, which became the center for foreign trade and commerce. Japanese officials then published Korea's first newspaper, Chosun Shinpo, in 1881. Chinese-language articles were aimed at Korea's educated elite, which advocated for constitutional government, freedom of speech, strong rule of law and legal rights, and Korean-led industrialization. Few of these goals came to pass. Japanese-language articles focused on news regarding business, specifically the stagnant Busan trade in rice and other farmed goods, which fluctuated wildly due to weather conditions and the whims of the tax-levying elite class. It ceased publication sometime after May 1882. Imo Incident. Daewongun remained opposed to any concessions to Japan of the West, helped organize the Mutiny of 1882, an anti-Japanese outbreak against Queen Min and her allies, motivated by resentment of the preferential treatment given to newly trained troops. Daewongun's forces, or old military, killed Japanese training cadre and attacked the Japanese legation. Japanese diplomats, policemen, students and some Ming clan members were also killed during the incident. Daewongun was restored to power briefly, only to be forcibly taken to China by Chinese troops dispatched to Seoul to prevent further disorder. In August 1882, the Treaty of Jomulpo indemnified the families of the Japanese victims, paid reparations to the Japanese government in the amount of 500,000 yen, and allowed a company of Japanese guards to be stationed at the Japanese legation in Seoul. Gapsunku. The struggle between Hangzhou Daewongun's followers and those of Queen Min was further complicated by competition from a Korean independence faction known as the Progressive Party, as well as conservative faction. While the former sought Japan's support, the latter sought China's support. On the 4th of December 1884, the Progressive Party, assisted by the Japanese, attempted a coup and established a pro-Japanese government under the reigning king, dedicated to the independence of Korea from Chinese suzerainty. However, this proved short-lived, as conservative Korean officials requested the help of Chinese forces stationed in Korea. The coup was put down by Chinese troops, and a Korean mob killed both Japanese officers and Japanese residents in retaliation. Some leaders of the Progressive Party, including Imo Incident, fled to Japan, while others were executed. For the next 10 years, Japanese expansion integration into the Korean economy was approximated only by the efforts of Tsarist Russia. Dongguk Revolution and First Sino-Japanese War. The outbreak of the Dongguk Peasant Revolution in 1894 provided a seminal pretext for direct military intervention by Japan in the affairs of Korea. In April 1894, the Korean government asked for Chinese assistance in ending the Dongguk Peasant Revolt. In response, Japanese leaders, citing a violation of Convention of Shenzhen as a pretext, decided upon military intervention to challenge China. On May 3, 1894, 1,500 Qing forces appeared in Incheon. The same day, 6,000 Japanese forces also landed in Incheon, producing the Sino-Japanese War. Japan won the First Sino-Japanese War, and China signed the Treaty of Shimonoseki in 1895. Among its many stipulations, the treaty recognized the full and complete independence and autonomy of Korea, thus ending Korea's tributary relationship with the Chinese Qing dynasty, leading to the proclamation of full independence of Joseon, Korea in 1895. At the same time, Japan suppressed the Dongguk Revolution with Korean government forces. With the exception of Tsarist Russia, Japan now held military predominance in Korea. Assassination of Queen Min. The Japanese minister to Korea, Murugoro, orchestrated a plot against 43-year-old Queen Min, and on 8 October 1895, she was assassinated by Japanese agents. In 2001, Russian reports on the assassination were found in the archives of the Foreign Ministry of the Russian Federation. The documents included the testimony of King Gojong, several witnesses of the assassination, and Karl Ivanovich Weber's report to Alexei Lobanov-Rostovsky, the Foreign Minister of Russia, by Park Jong-hyo. Weber was the charge d'affaires at the Russian legation in Seoul at the time. According to a Russian eyewitness, Seradin Sabatin, an employee of the king, a group of Japanese agents entered Gyeongbokgung, killed Queen Min, and desecrated her body in the north wing of the palace. When he heard the news, Hengxian Dawongan returned to the royal palace the same day. On the 11th of February 1896, King Gojong and the Crown Prince moved from Gyeongbokgung to the Russian legation in Jangdong, Seoul, from where they governed for about 1 year. An event known as the Korea Royal Refuge at the Russian legation, democracy protests and the proclamation of the Korean Empire after the Royal Refuge. Some Korean activists established the Independence Club in 1896. They claimed that Korea should negotiate with Western powers, particularly Russia, to counterbalance the growing influence of Japan. In 1897, this club had destroyed the 1537 Yanjianmen, a special gate where Chinese envoys had been escorted and received, and contributed to the construction of Independence Gate, and they held regular meetings in the Jongno streets, demanding democratic reforms as Korea became a constitutional monarchy, and an entered Japanese and Russian influence in Korean affairs. In October 1897, Gojong decided to return to his other palace, Deoksugung, and proclaimed the founding of the Korean Empire. During this period, the Korean government conducted a westernization policy. It was not an enduring reform, however, and the Independence Club was dissolved on the 25th of December 1898 as the new Emperor Gojong officially announced a prohibition on unofficial congresses. Prelude to annexation. Having established economic and military dominance in Korea in October 1904, Japan reported that it had developed 25 reforms which it intended to introduce into Korea by gradual degrees. Among these was the intended acceptance by the Korean financial Central Department of the Japanese Superintendent, the replacement of Korean foreign ministers and consuls by Japanese, and the Union of Military Arms, in which the military of Korea would be modeled after the Japanese military. These reforms were forestalled by the prosecution of the Russo-Japanese War from February 8, 1904 to September 5, 1905, which Japan won, thus eliminating Japan's last rival to influence in Korea. Under the Treaty of Portsmouth, signed in September 1905, Russia acknowledged Japan's paramount political, military, and economic interest in Korea. 2 months later, Korea was obliged to become a Japanese protectorate by the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1905, and the reforms were enacted, including the reduction of the Korean army from 20,000 to 1,000 men by disbanding all garrisons in the provinces, retaining only a single garrison in the precincts of Seoul. On January 6, 1905, Horace Allen, head of the American legation in Seoul, reported to his Secretary of State, John Hay, that the Korean government had been advised by the Japanese government that hereafter the police matters of Seoul will be controlled by the Japanese gendarmerie, and that a Japanese police inspector will be placed in each prefecture. A large number of Koreans organized themselves in education and reform movements, but Japanese dominance in Korea had become a reality. In June 1907, the Second Peace Conference was held in The Hague. Emperor Gojong secretly sent 3 representatives to bring the problems of Korea to the world's attention. The 3 envoys were refused access to the public debates by the international delegates who questioned the legality of the Protectorate Convention. Out of despair, one of the Korean representatives, Yejun, committed suicide at The Hague. In response, the Japanese government took stronger measures. On July 19, 1907, Emperor Gojong was forced to relinquish his imperial authority and appoint the Crown Prince as regent. Japanese officials used this concession to force the accession of the new Emperor Sunjong following abdication, which was never agreed by Gojong. Neither Gojong nor Sunjong was present at the accession ceremony. Sunjong was to be the last ruler of the Joseon dynasty, founded in 1392. Japan-Korea Annexation Treaty. In May 1910, the Minister of War of Japan, Terusuke Masatake, was given a mission to finalize Japanese control over Korea after the previous treaties had made Korea a protectorate of Japan and had established Japanese hegemony over Korean domestic politics. On the 22nd of August 1910, Japan effectively annexed Korea with the Japan-Korea Treaty of 1910 signed by Yuan Yong, Prime Minister of Korea, and Terusuke Masatake, who became the first Japanese Governor-General of Korea. The treaty became effective the same day and was published 1 week later. The treaty stipulated, Article 1, His Majesty the Emperor of Korea concedes completely and definitely his entire sovereignty over the whole Korean territory to His Majesty, the Emperor of Japan. Article 2, His Majesty the Emperor of Japan accepts the concession stated in the previous article and consents to the annexation of Korea to the Empire of Japan. Both the Protectorate and the Annexation Treaties were declared void in the 1965 Treaty on Basic Relations between Japan and the Republic of Korea, because both treaties were obtained under threat of force, and that the Korean Emperor, whose royal assent was required to validate and finalize any legislation or diplomatic agreement under Korean law of the period, refused to sign the document. This period is also known as Military Police Reign era, in which police had the authority to rule the entire country. Japan was in control of the media, law as well as government by physical power and regulations.